As it pertains to the relationship between the Smash Bros. Community and the fighting game community, I'm confident in saying that as of now, there is no real consensus on where the two stand, especially considering that the entire premise of the matter is subjective on the individual as well as the camp they resonate with more. Therefore, as someone who resides in the camp that is the fighting game community, there's really only one lens I can see this issue through. However, even with that said, attempting to break down one side of an argument is still better than turning a blind eye to both. Before anything else, I'd like to preface by saying that while I don't believe I stand to speak for every single FGC member out there, I do believe that the points I'm about to make regarding this topic are roughly the same points that the majority of the FGC would make if put in the same predicament. To start, the question, is Smash a fighting game, is the number one question that comes up when members of the FGC and the Smash community get into any sort of an exchange, be it a cordial one or a confrontational one. However, whether the developer of the Smash Bros. Games, its community, its tournament organizers, or anyone else calls it a fighting game, a party game, or even a combination of the two, that argument is arbitrary. The subjective bias always tends to show itself when the categorization of the Smash games comes into question. Nevertheless, the question, is Smash a fighting game, is a meaningless one in an attempt to understand the disconnect between the two communities. The right question for both sides to mull over, however, is not what specific genre the game series belongs to, but rather which community is it a part of, which leads us to asking, is Smash Bros. A part of the FGC? It's been gone over before, however, in order to truly break down that question, we first need to define what it really means to be a part of the fighting game community. The FGC is comprised of people of many walks of life, be it different ages, backgrounds, countries, and the list goes on. Though the thing that brings the FGC together is that we all care for the community, and that care is layered. While I do believe there is somewhat of an outlier to be mentioned, the majority of the FGC understands this main concept. Being a part of the FGC not only means that you play a fighting game, be it competitively or for leisure, but it is the care that the fighting game community members have for all fighting games, not just the one they specialize in. Caring enough to understand some basic concepts, brushing up on some history with regards to certain games, players, or instrumental moments and figures within the FGC is what makes someone a part of the FGC.
How are you, sir? What's your name?
What's my name?
Yes.
Wait a minute. Does he know where he's at?
Just in line for some
No,
chicken
no.
nuggets, and they're like,
Look.
we need a commentator. And I'm like, I only know Smash, but hey, I'll do it.
You know anything about Street Fighter?
Like, Ryu's in it.
Ryu's in it? Okay, cool. Anyways.
Crossing that concept alone over to the Smash community is already a pretty definite factor into how the FGC should regard them. It is pretty widespread that the majority of the Smash community simply does not care for anything else that is not their own. To add to that fact, the two main Smash Bros. Titles currently, Super Smash Bros. For Nintendo 3DS and Wii U, or better referred to as Super Smash Bros. 4, and Super Smash Bros. Melee, have also had this issue within their own circle, as it's been documented that the two have experienced their own community divide.
Different levels of satisfaction, but I feel like they just both cater to different audiences. If you like something more fast-paced and more, I will say, more wild, you can go for Melee. But if you like something more that you can analyze, that you can, kind of like, I feel like Smash 4 is your cup of tea. But I think that they're just different. They look similar, but they're very different.
However, despite that, I do believe that the FGC has to concede one similarity that it has with the Smash community, and that has to do with the outlier referenced earlier, which would be Capcom exclusive fighting game players. While the criticism isn't mentioned nearly as much considering that the Smash community is more often scrutinized for this behavior, the Capcom exclusive community in the FGC has been known to be just as bad about the caring aspect of the FGC as the Smash community has, not really caring to learn to appreciate other games, whether they had their own storied history like SNK's King of Fighters, or reboots of classic titles such as Killer Instinct. For the Capcom diehards, it was either Capcom on the label or bust. Now, it is safe to say that while the majority of the FGC might not have appreciated that way of thinking from the Capcom hardcore audience, they had to live with it, predominantly because of one reason: Capcom has already paid its dues. It is widely known that Street Fighter is the torchbearer for all fighting games. It might not have been the first in the genre, but it's the one that put it on the map and gave it its most credible legs to stand on. Street Fighter was put on such a pedestal that it wasn't until recently that the thought that the FGC could not support itself without Street Fighter was thought of as a legitimate argument. In short, despite a number of their community not truly acknowledging the rest of the fighting game landscape, the reason why Street Fighter is still considered as FGC is because it's part of its history, something I don't believe the Smash community can say so themselves. Currently, as it stands, I believe there is somewhat of a disconnect between not only the FGC and the Smash community, but a disconnect between the two quote-unquote faces of the Smash community. The first persona of the Smash community is one I believe is its true representation. Smash Bros. Players and its landscape have built themselves up practically from the ground up, with no real exterior help aside from the EVO 2013 donation drive, which was also predominantly self-supported by its own community. While I'm certain this type of mentality already existed before coming to light of sharing the main stage with traditional fighting games, the Smash community plays their games and cares for their games. They don't care if the FGC considers them a part of the pack or not, as it has no effect on their position as a self-sustained community. The second quote-unquote face or persona of the Smash community, and one I don't believe is its actual representation, is the one that is clamoring for respect and acceptance from the FGC across Reddit threads, YouTube comments, and any other platform that highlights this argument. The thing that has become evident throughout the process of understanding the relationship between the Smash Bros. Community and the FGC is that there is a grittiness to both. However, the inception of that attitude is derived from two different things. The FGC's grittiness comes from having to battle for spots at the arcade, not being able to play anymore after losing, forced to play in small venues, and basements galore. The sense of earning your place before becoming accepted was a big part of that scene. The Smash community, on the other hand, has developed a certain chip on their shoulder as they have had to self-sustain and promote for so long without being acknowledged, considering the games were made for home console, and that the arcade camaraderie was never really in play. By and large, I don't believe there is a resolution here. However, I don't think there is a need for one. The identities of both parties involved are well known and established. It would have been one thing if the FGC and Smash had a divide, but the two were never truly considered as a whole to start with, so bringing the two together seems a bit conflicting. While recently there has been more of a crossover between the two communities, as games like Dragon Ball FighterZ and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate has piqued interest from players of opposite sides, those instances at this point in time are more so the exception than the rule. The disconnect of the two communities is exemplified in many aspects, be it how the community runs itself, what it prioritizes, who it looks up to, and the list goes on. However, despite this disconnect, I don't believe that the FGC has any less respect for the Smash community, as we accept their presence on a shared stage, even if we might not always see eye to eye.